Hi, I'm Skilla, and this is Nerd Stuff with Skilla. Today I wanted to talk about the season finale of Rick and Morty Season 3, the Rickchurian Mortydate. This video contains spoilers from Rick and Morty, predominantly just having to do with the third season, but I may say something at some point in this video that is about Season 1, Season 2. If you're not caught up, you just go watch Rick and Morty. As soon as you're done doing that, hop back over here and listen to my review of Season 3, Episode 10. This episode was mostly A plot line with a little bit of B plot line peppered in there. I read an article where the creators were talking about how they expected to have 14 episodes this season and it just didn't really work out that way. And I don't believe that this was originally intended to be the finale. But they had to wrap up the Beth and Jerry plot line, so they kind of stuffed it in there as well. I think that's what happened. I'm not 100% sure. But I kind of got that impression from the article that I read. The A plotline is a confrontation between Rick and the President of the United States, not President Evil Morty. A lot of speculation was had about whether this episode was going to have to do with Evil Morty or just with the regular president. I really like that the show didn't change who the president is just because it changed in reality. Personally, I think that Rick and Morty takes place about 10 years in the future from actual time. And I can make another video on that in the future with my evidence for that assumption. But for now, I like that they stayed with the same president and didn't make, our current president the star of this episode. I think it was smart to stay with the previous president. Rick and the president disagree about the nature of why Rick and Morty come in to save the nation or world. The president believes that Rick comes and saves the world as repayment for the government turning a blind eye for his regular illegal activity. And Rick sees it as they could never hold him hostage or stop him from doing what he does anyway. After all, we have seen Rick escape some pretty insurmountable situations just within this season. This argument leads to a total battle royale between the president and Rick, which has them destroying large portions of the White House. Rick eventually gets the president into a headlock and convinces him to submit to take the selfie with Morty, which he's pretending this entire argument was about. Obviously, it was more of a dick measuring contest. The B plotline follows last week's episode, The ABCs of Beth, in that Beth starts to question whether she actually is herself or if she is the clone version of herself, while the original version of her goes out gallivanting and doing what she feels like doing. Rick tries to assure her that that isn't the case, but she doesn't really believe him and goes to Jerry to try and figure out how she feels about things. And Jerry kisses her and thinks that because he feels butterflies in his stomach that she has to be the real Beth. Meanwhile, Beth feels love for Jerry and thinks that she cannot be the real Beth because the real Beth never loved Jerry. I don't think that anything in this episode 100% proves that we have the real Beth or a clone Beth. They definitely are leading us to believe that she is the real Beth, but I don't think that this episode necessarily proves that. I also don't think that it really matters that much. If there is a rogue Beth running around, I think we might run into her at some point in time, regardless of whether it's the original Beth from this timeline or a different Beth from somewhere else who runs into C-137 Rick. At the end of the episode, Beth and Jerry are back together, and everybody's happy about this except for Rick. And everybody in the family takes turns taking jabs at Rick, which clearly he's not pleased about. Beth says in a fourth wall breaking line that the next season is going to be a lot more like season 1, except for more streamlined. And I think that the two of them getting back together is really going to be good for people who were sad about the lack of Jerry and therefore conflict between Rick and his family in this season. But I do think that they explored a lot more themes of internal conflict rather than just bickering within the family members or trying to figure out how they work together as a family now that Rick is back in the picture, because he was gone for a long time. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if the creators got Jerry out of the way for a little while so they could explore some of the bigger themes that they explored in this season without having to worry about what's going on with him and Beth. They just gave us that him and Beth are split up, and when we meet up with them in those various states of being away from each other. So I don't think that they wrote themselves in this direction in order to get Jerry out of the show forever, but more to give them wiggle room for their storytelling abilities within this season. This episode was really good, but I expected a little bit more from a season finale. Again, I think that's because they intended to have 4 more episodes, which hopefully will mean that the beginning 4 episodes of season 4 are really crazy. I think that we'll probably get it a little bit quicker than we got this season, just because I feel like all of the plot lines that they left open in this season will make it easier for them to write the next season. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were working on both at the same time, which was probably part of what caused this season to take so long. They say it's because they're perfectionists and they didn't want to put out something that wasn't a perfect episode, and they felt like all of these episodes were really, really good. And they were. But I think that part of that was so that they knew they had things to move forward with into season 4. Even though this episode wasn't my favorite in this season, it was absolutely jam-packed with references and callbacks. So I just want to go over as quickly as possible all of the different callbacks and references. The first reference we get is when the president says there's some sort of alien Googa in the basement. This is a reference to a Channel 101 short, and it is also, I think, a reference to Predator, and when you see through the Googa's eyes, I think that's a reference to the Predator movie franchise, because you see through the Predator vision sometimes. Rick and Morty play Minecraft throughout the episode. The Kennedy sex tunnels, which is a reference to our infamously promiscuous President John F. Kennedy. There's a reference to the Ghostbusters, both from Rick and by the president shortly thereafter. When Rick calls the president a control freak who uses drone strikes to cope with his insecurity, I believe that's a reference to Barack Obama in the countless drone strikes that he allowed during his administration. "Don't high road me," quote from the president, is a callback line. Rick says it to Summer in the Total Rick-All episode, and then Beth also says it to Rick in the original pilot episode as well. X-Files is mentioned in reference to the small alien that the president wants them to remove from the White House. Moving to a new version of Earth is a bitch and a half is a reference to the 2 times we know that Rick and Morty have changed dimensions at this point. Rick directly references an episode of South Park about Minecraft and the speed at which both South Park and Rick and Morty are created. The episode he's talking about is the informative murder porn episode, and then I think there's also a more meta reference. I think that they're calling back to the season 6 episode. Simpsons already did it as well. I think the whole 70s shrinking back and forth between the President, Rick, and Morty is a reference to the 1966 movie The Fantastic Voyage, which they also referenced in the Anatomy Park episode. The ship looks pretty similar to the one used in The Fantastic Voyage, and in the movie it shrinks as slowly as, maybe even slower than the president shrinks in this episode of Rick and Morty. When the president says America is basically the world, I think that's a reference to how in a lot of sci-fi movies, especially alien invasion movies, whoever the president is or whoever's in charge of military stuff for the United States always acts like America's the only thing that has any say in this contact or invasion. It is always like that. I think that was just a joke at the expense of sci-fi writers and how tropey some things can be. Rick is creating peace in the Middle East, which I think is a callback to the Vindicators episode earlier in this season, where we find out that when Rick is really drunk, he likes to talk about conflict in the Middle East and how he would resolve it. They also hold this peace summit in a Star Wars cantina, which is a direct reference to A New Hope. Rick calls himself Doctor Who, which I really liked. When Rick is being chased by the president throughout the White House in a gerbil ball, there is a string of references. We pass sets for the moon landing, 9/11, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, a UFO that's labeled Churchill, Washington crossing the Delaware, a couple of jungle scenes, which I think is a reference to our involvement in conflicts in tropical areas, most notably Vietnam. They burst through several layers of floor. One of those has a pentacle that appears to be drawn in blood, surrounded by candles, which I think is a reference to the Skull and Bones, Bohemian Grove, satanic worship, conspiracy theories. And then the next floor that they burst through, it has Tupac's body in it. The action was interesting enough, but they also threw in all of these little references to secrets that the government might be keeping, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then, of course, the final scene of the episode, the post-credits scene, is Mr. Poopy Butthole with his new wife and child. This is a callback to the post-credits scene of the finale from season 2, where Mr. Poopy Butthole informs us that we'll wait a year and a half, and hopefully we'll have less time to wait for the new season. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a big thumbs up. If I missed any references or if there's a part of the story that you really liked, please comment down below. Make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this video and want to hear more nerdy stuff from me. And of course, thank you so much for watching.